Even though we titled this segment Long Lee-Enfields, we're really talking about the early Lee Medfords as well as the Long Lee-Enfields.
The story of the Long Lee-Enfield really starts with James Paris Lee, who was a Scottish-born American inventor by way of Canada. And he was really the man who developed the magazine bolt-action rifle as we know it.
By 1888, 1889, James Paris Lee's magazine and his basic action had been adopted by the British, but combined with Medford Rifling. Now, Medford Rifling is a multiple groove, shallow groove rifling system that works great on non-jacketed black powder cartridges. Unfortunately, in 1886, the French had introduced to the world smokeless gunpowder with Poudre B in the Lebel rifle. So the British had a very good gun, really one of the most advanced rifles of their day, that quickly became obsolete. They found that literally the cordite cartridges would just blow the rifling out. So they went back to the drawing board and they continued to make small changes. Originally, the Lee Medford had an 8-round detachable box magazine, and then it went to a 10-round magazine as one of the improvements. They also did things like put safeties on. But the big difference between a Lee Medford and a Lee-Enfield is the fact that the Lee-Enfield has 5-groove, sharp Enfield rifling. That's where you get the name from.
Now this Lee-Enfield stays in service. Well, the family of Lee-Enfield's service, they're still being used in some parts of the world today. But the long version of it was really the backbone of the British forces during the Second Anglo-Boer War. It was used around the Empire, the relief of Chitral, say in 1897 up on the northwest frontier of India. And most importantly, it served throughout the South African War of 1899-1902.
The hardest part to talk about is trying to distinguish one Long Lee-Enfield from another. You go hopelessly crazy trying to decipher the British system of marks and asterisks and all the hieroglyphics that appear all over these guns. It's a subject for a very thick book which Ian Skennerton wrote.
The first Medford that came out in 1888 held 8 rounds, which was quite a few rounds for a military rifle at that period. Later versions of it expanded the magazine capacity to 10 rounds, so that when the Lee-Enfield appears in 1895, 10 rounds is standard. Now the Lee-Enfield comes about because when the change from the compressed black powder cartridge goes into use of cordite. This cordite had higher pressures and higher burning, and after about 6,000 rounds, they found that the Lee Medford rifling just wore away completely. So at the Royal Small Arms Factory in Enfield, which is north of London, they developed this sharp cornered rifling, and that's how we get the Lee-Enfield.
These guns continued to serve as Medfords, and then Lee-Enfields. 1895 is the main change over to the Lee-Enfield rifle, and it is the principal rifle of the British Army during the Second Anglo-Boer War. And you have 2 Enfields in service at this time. You have the infantry rifle with about a 30-inch barrel, which is a very long rifle. And then you have cavalry carbines that typically have 20 and 3/4-inch barrels. So with that infantry rifle, you have just fabulous sight radius. Obviously the The rear sight is forward of the receiver ring. You know, you don't want to go crazy and put aperture sights on or anything, but they're actually very good sights for their day. And then the other thing that the British were very interested in was long-range volley fire. Machine guns were just coming into service, but they thought, you know, we could deny ground to the enemy by having everybody in the regiment put up these long-range volley sights. There's a one at the front and then the aperture at the back, and that was for putting volley fire from 1,600 to 2,800 yards to deny a part of the ground of the battlefield to the enemy.
The British were not slow learners. The Boer War made believers out of many of their more prescient thinkers. And they realized that the charger loading of the Mauser system was a distinct advantage. And so in the first decade of the 20th century, many Long Lee-Enfields were converted to charger loading by adding the now familiar hoop-shaped bridge over the back of the receiver that is familiar to us through the SMLE. About the time of the First World War, the British also recognized that long rifles with 29 or 30-inch barrels were awkward in the trenches, and that short rifles were not just for the cavalry. They made sense for the ordinary infantryman, and that was the genesis of the SMLE, the short magazine Lee-Enfield. The long ones today are symbols of elegance, because the workmanship on them is you'll never see that again.
Long Lee-Enfields aren't easy to find these days, and when you do find them, they're a little pricey, but they are delightful old rifles. That's all the time that we have for this week. If you like this show and you're not an NRA member, you need to join right now. Go to AmericanRifleman.org. I'm Mark Keefe, and I'll see you next week right here on American Rifleman Television.